everybody. Welcome to another edition of Double Cross Radio. This broadcast coming to you on the 22nd day of October, the year 2015. And today, I had some other things I was going to talk about today, but last Friday, the day after our last show, all my plans kind of changed as one of my personal heroes passed away. His name is Irwin Schiff. I've never met the man. I've met and talked briefly with his son, Peter. I really didn't know much about him other than the fact that he was very courageous. And he was a personal hero to me, as I said. He was an anti-tax crusader. And so I thought before we got into talking about Irwin Schiff, I'd just discuss the topic of taxes. We've had this as a topic before on our show. And I'm not sure exactly how to break this down any different than I have before. So if some of you have heard me say this before, I'm hoping there's lots of people out there that haven't. So let's get into this. Taxes to me are they're efforts by the government to raise funding to support the government, because the government in itself does nothing that anybody would pay money for. And so realizing this, they have to find a way to legally steal the efforts or the profits or the income of others. Over time, they found that just passing along saying we can take the money and we're here to get our due, that the law says you have to pay it, didn't work so well. It didn't wow the constituents out there. They weren't real happy about forking over a percentage of their hard-earned produce or products or whatever. And so they started to use propaganda to tell everybody that it was their duty to be a patriotic citizen. They should be they should be willingly doing this. And this is the new taxation, is that that never mind that the property tax means that you will eventually lose your house and your property if you don't pay the state. And never mind that having your income from a job where you're a wage earner tax is little different than a property takings, because that is your property. You have helped produce something, and your share of it is represented by the currency that you're paid in. It's not really money, it's currency. It's produced by the Federal Reserve. And other people will say, well, because you accept money paid in Federal Reserve backed currency, not money, then that is taxable. I don't know. I have different opinions on that. I think today everybody is paid in digits and ones and zeros that are in a code, and that's your pay. But the main thing that was getting back to this taking thing, I have to one more thing popped in my head. If it is a taking, and I believe it is, takings they're prohibited. In other words, it's a protected right. That's a natural right that all people have, is the right to their own property. That which they produce with their own sweat and blood and tears, that's theirs. And they have a right to that property. And the government has no right to it, according to the Fifth Amendment. And if it should find a way to take that property, it needs to compensate the parties adequately for what has been taken. Well, that would defeat the purpose of an income tax if you had to pay them all back. So I believe that income tax is unconstitutional, no matter what anybody else says about it being a law in the books or anything else. It's an unconstitutional law. It isn't really a law. They could pass a law tomorrow that said that blonde-haired, blue-eyed people didn't have to pay taxes and everybody else did, and that wouldn't be right either. Although there'd be a lot of people dyeing their hair blonde and getting blue contact lenses to try and avoid taxes. I mean, it's that nobody wants to pay taxes, and nobody should have to pay taxes because they should be able to own their property. And that's the basis of a free society, is the ownership of property. And there's nothing more fundamental to property, the definition of property, than something you create yourself. And if you only get a symbol of what you've created, if you are working on an assembly line producing cars and you get a check every Friday, that is still your property. So just remember that this, I don't think this is, I don't urge anybody to go to war or to become tax protesters and end up in prison, but we should be spreading this word. And once our numbers are great enough of people who understand this fraud and deception that's going on, then maybe I'll change my attitude about what can be done. Right now, the numbers are so small. I think you'll just serve as examples to those to keep people timid and cowering in fear of the IRS. That's another thing that's really typical of a free country, isn't it? That people cower in fear of the tax collection agency. Now, a lot of people think that it's our duty to pay taxes because taxes pay for roads and schools, and they pay for our military defense, and they pay for lots of things that the government does. Well, that's really not true. The taxes, the only reason for an income tax is to service the debt that the U.S. government owes the Federal Reserve. And some of you out there say, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve is part of the government. How can they owe money to themselves? Well, the Federal Reserve is a private bank, everybody. And every dollar that the government spends is a dollar of debt that's created by the Federal Reserve. And the income tax is the manner in which the Federal Reserve is paid for the interest on that debt. So as spending increases, the debt increases, and the amount of taxes has to increase. It's possible that if you had an economy where people were continually entering the workforce and there was lots and lots and lots of jobs, that it's possible that individual rates of taxation could go down because the total number of taxes would increase. That doesn't make it right. But the taxation that's imposed on you, the reason you have a Social Security number, that is your bond. That is your method by which the U.S. government will collect taxes from you throughout your entire life to pay interest on the debt that they create with their excess spending. I think if you start to understand this, all of a sudden lots of doors open up and the curtains are drawn back on a lot of windows, and you are able to fully realize why it is that the Congress has no incentive to reduce their spending. They are mandated to, the IRS is going to raise the tax. They will raise their tax rates because they have to meet the debt that they owe the Federal Reserve. But they can spend much more than they're ever expecting to raise in taxes, and the Federal Reserve is just peachy with that. So as the deficits grow, the levels of taxation have to increase. As we've explained in previous shows, the more and more of the productive sector of our government gets taxed, the less incentive there is to be part of the productive sector. I mean, you have to have a really whiz-bang idea to go out there, or be just extremely talented. Maybe like you're could be a professional athlete, or those guys get taxed up the yin-yang. But you have to have some kind of a special talent. Maybe you're a rock musician, or you're a fabulous artist, and you get paid tons and gobs of money for your art. Whatever it is, there really aren't very many people that fit in that categories. Most of the people are just ordinary, in the middle of the bell curve. They're pretty much average, ordinary people. We work hard. I'm part of that. We work hard. We don't complain about stuff. We try and be productive. Yet, in an age where machinery and automation and computers should have made the cost of real living for people like myself and like the people in the middle of the bell curve, we find we have less and less to purchase for those kinds of goods that I'm talking about. The higher taxes go, the greater the deficits grow. And just for clarity's sake here, I'm not sure exactly what the total number is right now. I know it's somewhere north of, the reported number is somewhere north of 20 trillion now that the debt ceiling has been raised. See, they always raise the debt ceiling because they raise the debt ceiling, they do more spending, then taxes have to go up. I'm sorry, folks, in a way, when Barack Obama said that taxation wasn't the problem, spending was the problem, he was kind of right. I mean, I think he was trying to tell people this. I'm not a Barack Obama fan. I think he's too dumb to have thought of this on his own. But someone in his office maybe had tried to sneak the truth into one of his speeches. I don't think it was kind of said a little bit awkwardly, but I think it was kind of truthful what he said about that. So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Just my opinion. You know what they say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. So, maybe that was just, he didn't really understand what he was saying. He just had an epiphany and popped that in on everybody. He got chewed out for it probably by his puppet masters. Okay, now there's other kinds of taxes other than income taxes. There's property taxes, I mentioned earlier. Property taxes are just blatant takings. Property taxes should be illegal. They're unconstitutional. They are takings of your property. If you have to pay property taxes, you never can own any real estate or any property. It's always being rented from the state. What gives the state the legal ownership of the entire boundaries of that jurisdiction, and that you only have title to use that property as long as you pay your rent to the state? And if you fail to pay your property, you'll be evicted. We did a study, a story. It was a year ago, July. It was when I was at Freedom Fest that year, and we talked about the poor gentleman in Ashland that was gunned down by the county sheriffs because he was being evicted from his property. Now, his was not a property tax issue. It was a bank foreclosure, but it was the same kind of action. If the state had foreclosed and they wanted him off the property, that's what would have happened to him as well. And so that also does not sound like something that happens in a free country. Sales taxes are probably the most fair of all taxes, but they are still immoral. I mean, just think about what right does any government have to a portion of any voluntary exchange? This is one of the reasons why they are so afraid of Bitcoin, is because Bitcoin it is possible for a Bitcoin in the proper setting to go completely dark, and they have no idea what's going on, whether you've exchanged just words or you've actually made a business deal, a transaction. There's no way they can get their hooks into your money. If you get into Bitcoin on the blockchain in a properly encrypted network, it's totally secret. How can they know whether you sold something or not? Let's say you trap the flatulence of cows in, and you put it through a compressor and you put it into bottles so people can release it as a gag or something, and it becomes very popular, and you can just sell this. You can sell as much as you can produce, and you're just making a fortune. But you just do it all in the kind of a black market, kind of a gray market, dark market, I guess would be a good word for it, because it's every transaction is encrypted, and everything's being transferred to your Bit wallet, and they have no idea what it's worth or whatever. And the only way they can ever get anything from you at all is if you ever convert any of that Bitcoin into currency that was produced by the Federal Reserve. So as long as you can find other people who will accept Bitcoin for trades or transactions, there's no way sales tax can ever be impounded on you. So, I think that's the real reason that they brought down the Silk Road. They didn't want that to succeed at all. They didn't want that to be the first example of how you can have a free market in this country. The first time in a long time. And it was just the people that were involved in it were making money hand over fist, because unregulated, unencumbered by government, freedom will always produce the maximum amount of profit, and just how they it's how they operate. But government thinks it has a right to a part of every exchange like that. I live in a state where there is no sales tax. One of the 3, I think, in the United States that doesn't have a sales tax. I don't know how I'm so lucky, but I tell you that I think there's going to be a national sales tax before too much longer. And I think once that happens, you're going to find that it's going to be illegal to have a garage sale, a yard sale, an estate sale, some way where you just try and almost give away possessions at just sacrifice prices because you don't want to haul it off to the dump. And what you might consider trash is someone else's treasure. And so if you can make $100, $200, $300 on it, that's great. But the government, they think they have a right to some of that money. I don't know. That's how they are. That's how they think. They think they're entitled to a portion of every transaction. I don't know where they get that thought or how they think that that's legitimate, but that's how it goes. Now, that's not the only way they tax us. They tax us through business licenses, which is nothing more than a tax. It's a tax on providing a skill the public is willing to pay for. It could also be, like a skill or service. I'm talking about being a hairdresser or a barber or a real estate agent. It's also business licenses for providing products in a marketplace. Like I am a store owner. I have to have a business license, and I have to be licensed because of what I sell. I'm kind of a controlled substance delivery agent, and in this case, alcohol. I have to be I'm licensed by the state and the city, which is it's thankfully they're small enough that I'm not gonna die on that mountainside. But I can see a time in the future when those taxes will be much, much higher, and they will be a percentage of my expenses, a real percentage, and I hope that I am gone by then, because this is going to be really near the collapse of civilization in this country, and I don't want to be around when that happens, because it's going to be pretty ugly here. You have to buy a license to drive a car. You have to buy a license to own a car, to drive it anyway, and those are really nothing more than you're being taxed to travel. It's a travel tax. Same as a fee to get a passport. Well, they didn't have passports until about 100 years ago. People traveled freely around the world in the 18th, 19th centuries and before, but it wasn't until the middle of the bell curve had the means to travel around the world that they said, hey, we can't have this. People traveling, and we can have the elite people, the rich people, traveling wherever they want to without having to have a passport. But we can't have all these, country bumpkins traveling around and enjoying foreign cultures and seeing how the world is. We can't have them doing that without us knowing where they are, where they've been. So we have to have a passport system. And so now there's now maybe, I don't know, now there's that. That's another kind of tax, a tax on traveling. Well, Peter Schiff was against all these taxes just on not Peter Schiff, excuse me, that's his son, Irwin Schiff. He was against taxes in general, and he saw them for what they were, they're theft. He thought the most egregious was the income tax, and that's where he pitched his tent, and that's the battle he set out to fight. And he spent his life crusading against the Federal Reserve. I want to read a little bit about him. This was from his son's podcast. That's why I said Peter. I was looking at this as I started to talk. I shouldn't be doing that, I guess. he kind of wrote a short eulogy about his father, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the opening paragraph because I think that pretty much sums up exactly the truth of this situation. So these are Peter Schiff's words speaking about his father. It starts out, "My father, Irwin A. Schiff, was born February 23rd, 1928, the eighth child and only son of Jewish immigrants who had crossed the Atlantic 20 years earlier in search of freedom." That means that they came to the United States in 1908. And that was the year that my great-grandfather started a jewelry store in Medford, Oregon. That eventually became a family store and was a source of income for me for much of my lifetime. I was a proud descendant that owned and operated a branch of Lawrence's in a local mall for over 20 years. And I have some very fond memories from that time, but we started our family's store, which is still in existence and still operating, started in the same year that Irwin Schiff's parents came to America. I think that's great. Back to the eulogy. As a result of their hope and courage, my father was fortunate to have been born into the freest nation in the history of the world. But when he passed away on October 16th, 2015, at the age of 87, a political prisoner of that same nation, legally blind and shackled to a hospital bed in a guarded room in intensive care, the free nation he was born into had itself died years earlier. And it goes on to talk about his father's life. If you want to read this, you can go to our Facebook page, and we posted this on the Facebook page. So if you go to Double Cross Radio on Facebook, you'll see the story, and you can read the eulogy. It's very touching. It's I tell you, I really like Peter Schiff. I think he's awesome. I disagree with him about Bitcoin because he's not a big Bitcoin fan, and I am. But man, I don't know anybody I agree with 100%. Except maybe Drew, who's no longer on the show. That was really too bad. He and I probably had the closest to 100% agreement on just about everything as anybody I've ever met. And Drew is doing really well. He's finding a way to work undercover, well, not undercover, but to prosper in an unfree land by trying to be free in the ways that he can be free. And I really support that. I miss him, though. Anyway, I urge everybody to read this. The way that they treated him, you'd have thought that Irwin Schiff was some kind of ninja warrior that was going to rise from the dead and strike everybody down and have a miracle escape from prison. And he was kept in this prison. This is amazing. He was kept in this prison more or less in isolation. His family was not allowed to visit him. They could call him on a phone for a while, but he ended up losing his ability to speak, and they could talk to him, but he couldn't really respond other than just kind of grunt and make noises. And he could kind of talk, but the phone system is a relic of the 1940s, I think, that they were using, and so it wasn't very good. But I thought that opening paragraph, just think about it. How many of you have the courage to pack up what you have and get in a ship and sail to another country in the world? Chile's a nice place. I hear Colombia's really an up-and-coming place. Panama's nice. Costa Rica's nice. Guatemala, maybe not so nice, but maybe a lot of opportunity there. I think it's going to be an emerging nation soon. Maybe not in my lifetime, but in a young person's lifetime, I think they'll see amazing changes in Guatemala. Mexico, I like Mexico a lot. That's just the Western Hemisphere. You can go to the Far East, Vietnam. There's a lot to like about Vietnam, Thailand. Singapore is a really happening place, but it's kind of a closed shop. But if you can, I know people from here that have gone there and they've prospered. There's also great opportunity in Hong Kong. There's places in Africa where there's great opportunity. But think of the courage to just pick up. They were from Poland, his parents, and they didn't really know English. And they're coming to America. I don't know if they had any relatives here or not to welcome them, to help them along, to show them the ropes, so to speak. His parents were, his father was a carpenter. So I imagine he had skills and he could find work in construction. But I mean, think of it, just you can find work, but do you know what to do? I mean, I have a friend from Poland that's coming to visit us soon, and this will be his third visit where he's actually helped me with stuff, and he helps with projects around the house and stuff. And it's frustrating for him because we use different tools than he uses in Poland. We use different materials for building. We have, he's a pretty sharp guy. I mean, he figures things out pretty quickly. But at first it was frustrating because he didn't know what to call anything. And I can just imagine an immigrant. You learn pretty quick, but I think that they probably were able to get a crash course in English, and he was probably well employed throughout his life. And Irwin Schiff was able to go to college, which shows that his father was probably earning a pretty decent living in construction. He graduated from Connecticut, University of Connecticut, UConn, I believe. And he had a double major. He was accounting and economics. And guess what kind of economics he liked? Yeah, you got it. Austrian economics. He really liked Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson author. And Henry Hazlitt wrote a lot of columns, and he'd written other books. He liked his writings. They weren't all just Economics in One Lesson. He liked Hazlitt. So anyway, he wasn't totally successful. He got conned out of some money by somebody that was doing a Ponzi scheme, a la the. It's happened. It happened several times, but there was a guy a few years ago doing the same kind of thing. Anyway, in 1968, he testified before the Senate Committee on Banking and Currency in opposition to removal of gold backing from Federal Reserve notes. Now, that was just 3 years before it actually happened. He was urging them, don't do this. You don't want to do this. If you ever listen to Ron Paul talk about how he got into politics, is because when they removed the gold backing from our currency, that's when he knew he had to try and do something. He knew this was really a bad thing to do. And you can look on the graphs, the money supply, and you can see how it just takes off in an unsustainable direction up when they took the break off that ability to create currency. Because before they had to have gold to back it. In 1976. He published a book entitled The Biggest Con, How the Government is Fleecing You. He was a candidate for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination in 1996. And if you remember a few shows back, we had Mary Ruud on. She has been a candidate for Libertarian Party presidential nomination. So she's in pretty good company there. He participated in debates for presidential candidates that were in Washington on July 5th, 1996. And this is, 1996 for me wasn't that long ago. That was the middle of the Clinton administration. It's amazing. It's amazing that was just, 21 years ago? Wow. So he also had a website named paynoincometax.com, which offered his various books for sale. He was featured in Hollywood producer Aaron Russo's 2006 film, America, Freedom to Fascism. And by the way, all of you out there, if you get nothing from this show, you need to go watch that movie. It's a documentary that the late Aaron Russo did before his untimely demise, and he knew he was dying. He didn't care anymore about what they could do to him because he knew he was terminal, and he knew it, and so he just wanted to do something with the rest of his life that would stand and maybe do something good for society. And it's an amazing documentary. So well done, so well put together. I love that. I've watched it about 3 times. Anyway, he was originally he's gone to prison a couple times. The first time, it was for failure to file a proper form 1040. It wasn't because he didn't pay his taxes. They said he owed this much in taxes, but they didn't arrest him or imprison him for owing taxes. They arrested and imprisoned him for failing to file a proper form 1040. Because they know there is no law that says you have to pay income tax. And yet, in fact, Irwin Schiff was so sure that there was no law that he offered a $50,000 prize for anyone who could show him the law that said he was required to pay income taxes. No one ever took him up on that. So anyway, he spent time in prison for failing to file proper income tax returns, 1040 forms, for the years 1974 and 75. Now, this was several years after the fact. And I believe he served 4 years in prison for that. While in prison, he wrote another tax evasion book. I love this guy's spirit. This guy, one of my personal favorite movie of all time is Braveheart, and it isn't so much that it was great acting, although it was great acting, or the story was, it was pretty historically accurate. It was, it had some awesome action scenes in it, for me, the whole thing came down to the very end when Braveheart he's being executed in his last words, and he shouts it out as loud as he could, so he knew the king could hear it. His last words were freedom. And in the movie, this is something they maybe took a little license with, but the queen, who was pregnant, told the king that it wasn't his son. It was William Walker's son, Braveheart. And so that was, just letting him know that in those days, the kings were supposed to be able to impregnate the wives of anybody first. They had to sleep with them before their husbands could sleep with them. And this was kind of a turnabout's fair play type of thing. And so the king was not in that great health, and supposedly has kind of like a stroke moment or something. But I don't know. That one's something they may have taken a little license with. But to me, that Irwin Schiff was that kind of a character. He was never, ever, ever going to let them win. He was never going to admit defeat. He was always going to continue to fight. As long as he was fighting, they didn't win. They might be winning, but they hadn't won. And he wasn't going to finish fighting until he had lost. And he finally lost on Friday. And I think that we can reverse that loss. We can say that he didn't lose, he was just losing. Because we can pick up the flag and we can continue to fight the fight that he started on our behalf. He didn't do this. He was making some money selling his books and such, but his main reason for doing this was he saw that this was a fraud and that people that were not worthy were living at the expense of other people. That's just a horrible thing. What do we call those people? We call them thieves. And in our country, the thieves are called senators and representative and president, and you get the picture. And okay, so he was convicted. Now, I say these convictions are fraudulent because they're convicted by a judge who serves serves the federal government. I mean, he is a ward of the federal government's court system. So how can he be an impartial adjudicator? He can't. So if right there, the whole thing that he was sentenced on these things, it's fraudulent to begin with, just because you don't have an unbiased person. You have someone who sucks at the same tit as everybody else in government. And if we stop making payments on the debt, the Federal Reserve is going to just take over, and he's out of a job. Well, the judge can't let that system fail. So he's got to continue the theft. So let's see. He was sentenced a second time for, they called it tax evasion, because he filed forms, but on every line he just entered 0. Because he says, you have no right to know anything about my private life, about my finances, my financial health, wealth, whatever. You have no right to that information. I agree with him. I don't think I'm as courageous as he was. He got out of the prison system that time in June 1993, and then soon afterwards, like as we had said, he was running for president in the Libertarian Party. I'm kind of glad he didn't win. I think it would have been a premature death for him if he could have actually started to bring this cause to the American people in presidential debates or on national TV. And I think he could have really started to make a dent. So I think they probably did everything they could to not even get him be nominated to the Libertarian Party. Okay, so then he had other problems, and let's see. He was convicted of multiple counts of filing false tax returns for the years 1997 through 2002, and aiding and assisting in the preparation of false tax returns filed by other taxpayers. Now, that's just a bogus charge. He writes a book. He tells them that they don't have to do it, so other people are following his advice. And if they don't do it exactly the way he did or whatever, or if they just do it and they do it differently and they somehow violate some rule that has the same effect as a law, then they can say, well, I was moved to do it by this book, and they say, well, it's your fault for writing the book. No, he didn't do it for them. They did that on their own volition. So that was completely crazy. That's like saying that if someone comes into your restaurant and plots a murder, that you're an accessory. That's kind of the same logic they used to put Ross Ulbricht away for the Silk Road, because there was some criminal activity taking place on there. He was convicted for allowing that place to exist, which is just horrible. I mean, if it gets down to that, that's the same thing that Fritz Springmeier. He had conversations with people that were plotting a bank robbery, but he wasn't talking to him about any of that. He was trying to convert them into Christianity and get them to leave a life of crime. And because he had conversations with him at some point in time, he was charged with aiding and abetting, and he was sentenced to prison. And they had no evidence that he had ever said anything to them about that, and they refused to testify against him. They said, no, he was just a nice guy who wanted us to live a good life. But he was still convicted, and he was not allowed to really offer any testimony in his own defense. The judge wouldn't allow it. He was convicted on no evidence, as he says. It happens a lot. It doesn't just happen to one or two guys. It happens a lot. When you're making trouble, the federal government puts you in a federal court. The conviction rate's about 99%, and that's just how it is. You're not going to get out of there. They own the juries, they own the judges, they get their way, and you go to prison. It's a real rare case when that doesn't happen. Let's see. I'm going to read you the book list for Irwin Schiff. He wrote a book called The Federal Mafia: How It Illegally Imposes and Unlawfully Collects Income Taxes. He wrote that in 1992. That would be a good one for you to take a hold of. The Great Income Tax Hoax, Why You Can Immediately Stop Paying This Illegally Enforced Tax. He wrote that in 1985. How an Economy Grows and Why It Doesn't. And I believe Peter Schiff is still writing this book. He's added some other chapters to it. It's still available. It's still in circulation. What do they call it? It's still being printed. I don't know which edition it's in, but it's each edition. There's Peter Schiff has added things to him, and I think he used some of that money to help prepare or pay legal fees and prepare defenses for his father. The Social Security Swindle: How Anyone Can Drop Out. I'll read that one again. The Social Security Swindle: How Anyone Can Drop Out. He wrote that in 1984. How Anyone Can Stop Paying Income Taxes. He wrote that in 1982. The Kingdom of Molts. That was kind of interesting title. I think that's probably kind of a. I don't know. I haven't read it, so I don't know. I'm not going to say what I think it is. The Biggest Con: How the Government is Fleecing You. These books are all listed in the Wikipedia bio for Irwin Schiff. So if you want to look those up, you can find them there. And I imagine there's some of them are collector's items and some of them are available reprinted or used or whatever. You might come across one of those sometimes if you go to an eccentric's estate sale or somebody that it wasn't a mainstream media propagandized zombie head, thought for himself type person. You might find a book like one of those maybe in an estate sale that where you still don't have to pay a sales tax. Who knows? Anyway, also, if you have never watched that documentary Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo, make sure you do that. Put that on your to-do list. Sit down with your family and watch it, and maybe you might want to watch it before and then invite your family to watch it with you, and then maybe you could have a family discussion afterwards and talk about what that movie was about and see if maybe you can kind of bring that message of freedom to your children, to your grandchildren, to whatever, and counteract some of the deceitful propaganda that they get brainwashed with on a daily basis by our TV programming. They call it programming for a reason. His final incarceration has been told, the way they say it, they don't really come out and say it in an untruthful manner, but they kind of lead you to conclude falsely that he was imprisoned for this time he was in prison now for failing to pay taxes. And that isn't the truth. He was writing these books, and the IRS had, despite the fact that I think that it was truthful, other publications like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal came out and said that, yeah, everything in this book is the truth. So I can tend to believe those. Those are kind of liberal, they're not by any means government hacker. They weren't in the 80s. They weren't just government repeater stations or products. But the judge ordered him to stop publishing and disseminating these books. He said these books are not the truth. They're leading people you're destroying people's lives with these books. Of course, the real threat was to the government lives, the people that feed off that public tit. And anyway, they often quote that the IRS claims he owed over $2 million in taxes and penalties and fines. And, well, that's just a bunch of crap. They can say whatever they want. If it's not legal, the guy comes to your house and he says, well, I came here to collect money. These people owe me over $10 million, and I came here to collect. Well, if he isn't a government, he's probably not going to make his case. But if If he's a government official, you might have a hard time winning that one because, especially if it's a federal government official, they'll just haul you away, sell your assets for whatever they can get, and leave you to rot in a filthy jail. But anyway, he was given a court order by this judge to cease and desist, and he violated that order. He says, "I have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and I insist that I'm going to continue to distribute these books and journals that I've written for people to read. It's my freedom of speech. It's my First Amendment right to do this." And then he petitioned the judge, which is also one of his First Amendment rights. He petitioned the judge to show him the law that said where he was wrong in his books, to show him where he was fraudulent. The judge did not respond because because he realized that Irwin Schiff was correct. And so he then imposed the harshest sentence he could. He sentenced him to the maximum number of years that he was able to under the law. And he sent, at that time, I think he was 72 years old. It was a sentence of 12 years and 7 months. And he was within about a year of finishing this sentence when he died. And he had been offered a chance to get out of, and I believe I heard this. Yeah, I'm not sure where I heard this, and I haven't been able to corroborate it today while I was had time when I was trying to research this a little bit. But I believe he was offered a chance to get out of jail. He just had to renounce his writings, and he wouldn't do it. But all the time he was in prison, he was really restricted from even seeing his family. His son, Peter, really couldn't go see him. I call that cruel and unusual punishment for the crime that he was convicted of. That's a violation of your Eighth Amendment rights, if I remember correctly. Let's see, I have a pocket constitution here. Let's look it up. If you don't have one of these pocket constitutions, you can get it a couple ways. I think the Heritage Foundation will give you one free to get on their mailing list. And if you order anything from Alex Jones, he'll send you one. And they are pretty handy to have. Let's see, we are at Article 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. And I think that was cruel and unusual punishment. It was an unconstitutional decree by that judge. The judge should have been impeached and removed from his bench. But he wasn't, because he was doing what the people in charge told him to do. And they just didn't mention it to very many people. I wasn't aware of this happening. I was alive, and I was pretty active in 1996. I wasn't aware of this case. I was pretty much a news hound, politics guy. I was all over everything. I wasn't aware of it until years later, till I started following Ron Paul. And that was that was 2001, 2002. I started going to his website and looking at the things that he said in Congress. And so I was a pretty well-informed person. I had no idea this had happened in 1996. They kept this out of the news. The truth was withheld from you. That's also something that doesn't happen in a free country with a free press. And I just hope that this show tonight removes. By the way, Hal Anthony, I always have him on while I'm getting ready to do the show every night. If I tell you, there's probably a guy who's pretty close to my way of thinking too. I just really enjoy listening to him. I think he's right on so many things. And I liked how he summed up his show today. And so, Hal, another tip of the cap to you. It seems like week after week you impress me. But I'm kind of envious. I wish I had more of your talents. But what this is I related this to somebody in a conversation this week. we have no voice in the media. There's none. And we will never, I mean, there's some media program. This is a media program. Here I am using my voice to say something. It's a pretty small audience. And so they kind of leave me alone. I can kind of say what I want. I'm not making much of an impact or a splash. And they say it's better to let him do this. It gives them the illusion they have free speech. Let me tell you, as soon as I start to attract people to listen to me, and when I get an audience like Alex Jones has, they're going to become knocking on my door and telling me to shut up. That's what happens to Alex Jones. He's got tens of millions of people every week listening to him, and they've pretty much threatened him that he or his family will be they'll have a car accident or something, and they'll just take him off the air if he continues. And he can't really come out and say exactly what they say, but because he's been threatened and he's worried about his family. And I think he's getting ready to do his broadcast from an undisclosed location in an undisclosed country. By the way, I just took a sip some awesome pomegranate juice. Pomegranate juice is really good for you. It's a strong antioxidant, cancer fighter. Helps your immune system fortify itself. It tastes good too. Anyway, tastes really good with tequila, by the way. Anyway, back to the concluding statements here. I was talking with this person this week, and I said, we have no voice in the media. We have no representation in our government. You can't petition the government with your grievances. They won't. They'll pretend to listen and say, nothing we can do. Why do we even have representatives and senators if there's nothing they can do? But the only thing you can do is you can find the truth for yourself. It's still out there. They haven't covered all that up for some reason. Some of it has, but there are people that keep the truth alive, and they're the real heroes and patriots in this nation. And you can find those sources, and you can record them and keep them, and you can start passing the word to other people's one at a time. You can change people's minds and hearts and get them to go and do the same thing. And I don't know if you all remember the story of the king and the slave, and the king told the slave that if he did all this stuff, he would put one grain on a square of the checkerboard, and if he continued to do all these things he wanted to do every day, he would double it on every square until they reached the end of the checkerboard. Well, by the time they got to the end of the checkerboard, the king was bankrupt because it had so much grain that he couldn't put it all on there. It was more than all the grain in his kingdom. Well, that's the power of doubling. And if you can tell people about the tyranny and the conspiracy to enslave us, the Federal Reserve, the 9/11 crap that passes as truth, how terrible the JFK assassination report is, and how untruthful that is, and JFK was killed because he was going to take us away from the Federal Reserve System. He was going to offer competing currency, treasury money that was not based in debt, that was backed by silver, and the Federal Reserve notes would become worthless, and they knew it. They wouldn't be able to take us off a gold standard. And, they wanted us to be engaged in war in Vietnam, and anyway, I'm sure those are the reasons I'm sure he was killed. And he was killed by people working within our government in the CIA, a rogue operation if there ever was one. And I'm positive that that's the case. So the evidence is not conclusive. I could be wrong. But that's my opinion, and it's my story. I'm going to stick with it. And there's so much evidence that's piled up over the years. The Kennedy assassination. You can go on and watch the documentary Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Loose Change. You can watch either one of those. You can watch Aaron Russo's Freedom to Fascism. There's so much information that's out there that nobody ever sees. J. Edward Griffin about the creature from Jekyll Island. There is all of this. It's out there. It's there for you to grab a hold of and to expose more and more people to it. But you have to learn it well enough to be able to tell them the truth and explain it in a way that they know that there is no possible way you're not telling them the truth. And when you get to that point and you convert someone and you get them working on the way you worked, then you go to the next person. And we're not going to double it. We're going to say if everybody could turn 10 people in their lifetime, we could have this country back in a generation or two. We could bring it back. We could defeat the greatest nation on earth, the most militarized, most advanced military, the richest country, or used to be. We could defeat them just with the power of the truth. So keep speaking truth to power, and keep supporting UCY TV, because this is one place where you can hear the truth still. Tell your friends about the network. Get them to listen. Tell them about the podcasts on YouTube, on the RSS feeds, and get them listening to what's going on, because that's the only way. It's the only way we're going to ever change things. And if we don't act, it won't get better. It'll just get worse. Okay, that's all I had for this week. It's time for the music to start. And time for me to sign off. So it's been a pleasure talking to y'all. Jules, thank you so much for everything you do. It's one of my goals in life is to meet you sometime before I die, and to properly thank you for this opportunity to talk to people every week on Thursday night. So thank you all. Good night. There'll be a little bit of dead airspace here until the music starts. Let it be.